morning, and welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We are still keeping safe at home and streaming our services on Facebook. If you want to see previous Sunday worship services, you can find them on our website at firstjefferson.org or on YouTube. And if you want to be put on our mailing list and join us in other online meetings, classes, and events, send your contact information to admin at firstjefferson.org. Our service this morning is about religious humanism, a faith direction introduced by Unitarians in the 20th century. It, like many other ideas and beliefs, has evolved over the years. Whether you agree with it or not, it's important to know where the idea came from and how it has progressed. But first, let us begin our worship with music. Every human being has in him the germ of the idea of the holy. And to unfold this is the end of his existence. Every human being has in his breast the elements of the divine everlasting law, of duty. And to unfold, revere, obey this is the very purpose for which life is given. Every human being has the idea of what is meant by truth. Every human being has affections which may be purified and expanded into a sublime love. Such is our nature. These are the capacities which distinguish us from the animals. These are the things which make it possible for every man to be regarded as being of infinite work and sanctity. Thus spoke the Reverend William Ellery Channing, a Unitarian minister in the early 18th century, and 100 years later, the Reverend John Dietrich, another Unitarian minister, cited him as the inspiration of his beliefs, which are in contrast with the doctrine of human degradation as held by New England Calvinism. It was these beliefs that formed the basis of Unitarian thinking that led to the creation of religious humanism and the Humanist Manifesto. Please join us in singing hymn number 304 in your hymnal. If you have it, the words will be on the screen, A Fierce Unrest. And Reneel is our song leader again this week.
A fierce unrest is at the core of all existing things. It was the eager wish to soar that gave the gods their wings. There throbs through all the worlds that are this heartbeat hot and strong. There these joyous fears are mute, but for the rebel in our breast, and we remain as brutes. When baffled lips demanded speech trembled into birth. One day the lyric word shall reach from earth to laughing earth, from deed to dream, from dream to deed, from daring hope to hope. The restless wish, the instant need, still drove us up the slope. Sing we no governed firmament, cold ordered regular. We sing the stinging discontent that cleaves from star to star.
Men and women, do you realize what this faith of ours means? The life of humanity on this planet is in our hands. We can choose the path that we will follow, and we can follow the path that we choose. We can make this world what we will. We hold the keys to the future in our hands. We light our chalice this morning both for the history of our past and the keys of our future. Please join me in saying the covenant we say every Sunday morning. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Humanism was meant to be the faith for the future. Almost 100 years ago, a group of thinkers, both clergy and lay people, introduced the Humanist Manifesto, laying out what they considered humanity's origin, purpose, and place in the universe. Most of these people, although not all of them, were Unitarians. My questions this morning are these. How does religious humanism impact your thinking about the world and faith? How does religious humanism compare with secular humanism? And finally, is there a place for religious humanism in today's Unitarian Universalism? But before we think about that and go on to answer and respond to those questions, let's listen to the story for all ages. I don't like being sad.
Good morning. Today's story is by Reverend Foerster. I don't like being sad. There was a little boy named Carl who was very, 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 very sad. He had a good friend, a very good friend, who was sick and in the hospital. The woman at the hospital had said to Carl, "I'm sorry, but little boys can't visit people who are sick. Only adults and family can come in." "Even if it's your best friend?" Carl had asked. "That's the rules," said the woman at the hospital. Carl had never felt this sad before. It certainly felt strange. "I feel as if I'm going to break," he told his father. "Little boys don't break," his father assured him. Humpty Dumpty did, said Carl. And I'll bet it was because he was sad. Why do you think you'll break? His mother wanted to know. Because there's nothing I can do, Carl said. Nothing, he repeated and hung his head. What would you like to do? His parents asked. Make him better, Carl answered. You certainly can't do that, said his father. That's for the doctors to do, and I'm sure they're working on it. But perhaps you could do something else, said his mother. Something that will make you feel better. Like what? Carl wanted to know. He didn't think anything could make him feel better as long as his friend was so sick. You could make your friend a get well card, his mother suggested. He's probably too sick to read it, Carl argued. But it would be there when he woke up, said his father. What else could I do? He asked, unconvinced. You could light a candle, suggested his father, like we do in church. He can't see it from the hospital, said Carl skeptically. But you can see it, said his mother. And light connects things, warms you, makes you feel good. What else? Carl demanded, a tear threatening to escape his eye. You could talk about it, his parents said. That won't change things, said Carl, his arms folded across his chest. It might, said his mother. It might change the way you feel. Isn't there anything else I could do? Carl asked. He was getting sadder and sadder, and he knew pretty soon he'd be crying. You could hug someone or hold someone's hand, said his mother, offering her hand. You're just trying to make me feel better, said Carl. You want me to stop being sad, don't you? Nope, said his father. Be sad. You like your friend. Of course it makes sense you're sad that he's sick. But I don't want to cry, Carl said, tears already spilling from his eyes. Sadness is okay, soothed his mother. So is crying. Tears help make you feel less broken. So Carl cried a bit, and he hugged his mother, and he held his father's hand. Then, after a while, he lit a candle. He made a card, and he talked. He talked about his feelings and all the things that he and his friend had done before his friend had gotten sick, and all the things they wanted to do when he got better. And Carl's mom and dad were right. He still felt sad, but he felt better, and he didn't break. When Carl's friend got better, he read the card and smiled. And when he heard about the candle, he laughed. He told Carl on the phone, I had a fever that felt just like the fire on a candle. And when Carl's friend was well and came home from the hospital, he hugged Carl and thanked him for worrying about him. When I saw your card, he said, I wanted to get better faster, so I did everything the doctor told me. You helped me get well. And the two boys got on their bicycles and rode off to have some fun together.
That was Thomas Earthman, who's in charge of our religious exploration at this church, both for children and adults, reading that story. You know, our chalice lighting this morning said we can choose the path that we will follow, and we can follow the path we choose. What it didn't say is that the path will at times be rocky, will twist and turn and head back in the other direction. It never said we were in control of everything, including being sad. Well, here's my first response to this morning's questions. And let me begin by saying I am a religious humanist. I sometimes say I'm a mystical humanist because while I rely on science and rational thought, there are just some questions we can't answer that don't have explanations in the scientific world. For instance, we have theories for how we got here and models for where we might be headed, but we have only guesses as to why. Why am I here? Does my life have a purpose to fulfill? These are the questions that religions have always tried to answer. But somehow those answers tend to turn into rocks of so-called truth that sometimes hinder our seeing clearly what lies ahead. I was also raised in a household that took for granted things like tarot cards and palm reading, horoscopes and dream messages. Now I have to say I do not rely on any of these in my life today, but I hold a space for them in my consideration of the possible worlds. And I'm fascinated, if not convinced, when they sometimes prove correct, forgetting how many times they fail. I keep them in that little mental file drawer labeled Fascinating Ideas. But I'm even more interested in the varieties of religions that humanity has invented and how each of them has answers for the questions and problems that arose during the times they were created and still have some relevance today. The wisdom of human history is amazing, and the only thing more astounding is the stupidity, cruelty, and carelessness of human history that runs alongside. Now, I could pick something out of every major religion that would appeal to me, but I could not become a practicing member of that faith because I eventually discovered that the doors beyond the door labeled truth remain locked. I joined the Unitarian Church because I was promised that I could bring my doubts along with my faith and that no door was locked against exploration as long as I stayed in covenant with other members. Most of the 15 affirmations of the original Humanist Manifesto presented to the world in 1933 I can agree with, but not all of them. The second Humanist Manifesto was written in 1973, and a third followed that a few years later. And the same is true about them. For instance, one of the affirmations reads, "We are convinced that the time has passed for theism, deism, modernism, and several varieties of New Age thought." That might have been true for the signers of the manifesto, but I think it is foolish to believe that everyone should just drop these from their faith statement if they are consistent with their own life experiences. I see they have usefulness for many people and do not stand in the way of upholding the rest. The first two affirmations suggest that the universe is self-existing and not created, and that man, and it was written in the early 20th century, so they talk of man meaning both men and women, that man is part of nature and that he has emerged as a result of continuous process. After that, the affirmations deal with ritual, religious emotions relating to the supernatural, ideal human interactions, and a universal purpose to make the world a better place for everyone. It concludes, quote, "Though we consider the religious forms and ideas of our fathers no longer adequate, the quest of the good life is still the central task for humankind. Man is at last becoming aware that he alone is responsible for the realization of the world of his dreams, that he has within himself the power for its achievement. He must set intelligence and will to the task," unquote. We pretty much echo many of these sentiments in our faith statements today, but they also led to their own criticism. Many people hearken back to Nietzsche's claim that God is dead and man killed him. Nietzsche had anticipated the growth of science creating the death of religion, and Nietzsche had added, quote, "Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to become worthy of it?" Unquote. And that has been the main criticism to this day, that humanism has claimed that human beings have tried to replace God and failed to live up to the job. Another criticism that both supports and rejects religious humanism comes from the secular humanists and suggests that religion itself is the culprit and needs to be undone. I'll say more about that in a moment. But before I get on with my generosity report, let me add this personal aside. When I was rereading the Humanist Manifesto, I let my eye roam down the list of its signers and was reminded that I knew the author of the manifesto, the Reverend Ray Bragg, who was a minister of one of the churches in Kansas City when I moved there in the 60s. I ended up going to the other church in town, but I met him and I listened to him preach a few times. I mean, talk about 6 degrees of separation. It's one of the advantages of having lived so long. And now you can say, I know someone who knew the man who wrote the Religious Humanist Manifesto. Well, it's time for my generosity report. We've had a good month this fall, receiving more in pledges than we have spent. Thank you for the continuing timely paying of your pledges and for other contributions you might make. Now, this hasn't been true of every month of the pandemic, and we are grateful for those of you who can continue to pledge in these difficult times, and even to add a little bit more to that from time to time. It's not too late to add your contributions to the fall service auction, which also supports the operation of the church. Tina Harmuth is looking for items you have to sell and for services you might offer. You can contact her at serviceauction, all one word, at firstjefferson.org. I have a reading this morning that was written by the Reverend Curtis Reed in 1926. He was one of the leaders of religious humanism. And he said, "A word is a symbol of reality. This is true whether the reality be a perceptual fact or a conceptual theory. And when reality changes, clear thinking requires that the old symbol be exchanged for another, or that the change in content be clearly recorded." This is what he meant. When a word symbolizes a movement with continuity of problem and of attempt at solution, that familiar symbol, that word, should be kept and its changed meaning recorded. And then he gave an example. Psychology, he said, is a case in point. Once psychology was the name of the science that dealt with the soul. Later, of the science that dealt with mental faculties. And then the science that dealt with states of consciousness. And now psychology is the name of the science that deals with behavior. The old symbol still holds. Much more should this be true when the symbol is weighted with sacred associations and memories. Religion, he said, is a symbol which not only has continuity of problem and of attempt at solution, but which is also surrounded with the most hallowed associations and memories. Religion symbolizes the human quest to discover in the nature of man and the universe the kind of life that is inherently desirable, and to enlist in its behalf all instrumentalities, both human and cosmic, that are capable of assisting in its realization. This quest is man's religion. In early religions, the quest took the form of attempts on the part of man to relate himself to those instrumentalities and values that seemed to have significance for the welfare of the group. And later it took the form of attempts to placate the personal gods in order to gain personal peace. While the forms of religion have undergone revolution, we shall retain the term religion. My chief purpose, he wrote, however, is not to justify the word, but to record certain changes in its content and form. The common denominator of the old religions is found in man's response to superhuman sources of fortune. This belief in and relation to superhuman sources of fortune is characteristic of the old religions. Without this psychological situation, the old faiths cannot admit the religious validity of any human behavior. Hence, the old religions have resulted in a servile psychological attitude. He concluded, this pathetic and tragic outcome of the old religions is now somewhat relieved by humanistic tendencies, which are gradually growing everywhere. Modern thinkers are finding the content of religion in human worth and its cosmic significance to man's cooperation with and control of the process of life, to the end that human possibilities shall be completely and harmoniously realized. Humanism aims at the conscious experience of the fullness of life. It regards this as the heir and end of religion, of all social instrumentalities. In other words, humanism stands for the complete and permanent satisfactions of human life. The object of humanism is life, and its chief content is loyalty to life. As we consider these thoughts, join me in singing our middle hymn, number 302, Children of the Human Race.
Children of the human race, offspring of our Mother Earth, not alone in endless space, has our planet given birth. For across the cosmic skies, countless suns in glory blaze, and from untold planets rise endless canticles of praise. Should some sign of others reach this our lonely planet Earth, differences of form and speech must not hide our common worth. When at length our minds are free, then the clouds of fear disperse. Then at last we'll learn to be children of the universe.
This is my second response to the questions. Secular humanism also came into being in the 1930s, but it was a label more than an organization, and then a loose amalgam of various societies. In 1943, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, was heard to warn his following that, quote, the Christian tradition is in danger of being undermined by a secular humanism which hopes to retain Christian values without Christian faith. In the 60s and 70s, the term was embraced by some humanists who considered themselves anti-religious, as well as those who, although not critical of religion in its various guises, preferred a non-religious approach, according to Wikipedia. Members of the ethical movement, on the rise at this time, banded together to adopt a statement of principles that included the belief that morality is independent of theology and that new moral problems have arisen in modern industrial society which have not been adequately dealt with by the world's religions. The Council for Secular Humanism, established in 1981, describes a worldview that includes the need to test beliefs, a commitment to critical reason, and the use of the scientific method, a primary concern with individual fulfillment, growth, and creativity, a constant search for objective truth, an opposition to an afterlife, a search for viable ethical conduct, justice, and fairness, and the creation of a better world. I pulled several quotations from the internet this week that showed different attitudes between religious and secular humanism. But when I looked at them, I found them to be kind of redundant. So I chose just one from a self-proclaimed secular humanist that pretty much sums up the rest. Beverly Earls wrote, "Humanism is a celebration and a promise. It celebrates the integrity of human reason, responsibility, and compassion. And it promises a satisfying lifestyle that can be counted on. No more deprecation of the human condition, rather an opportunity to remain true to ourselves by having both feet in this world and responding to the challenges of existence with excitement and pragmatic service to others. Humanism is religion come of age. At long last, we humans can live dignified lives, finite creatures though we may be. At long last, men, women, and children can find ultimate fulfillment through bringing out the best in humanity for the sake of humanity." So there isn't really much difference in the final definition of what humanism is and stands for, except that many, maybe most of the definitions for secular humanism equate religion with a belief in a supernatural being and reject the term without exploring it further. Religious humanists like Curtis Reese, author of today's reading, define religion differently and keep the term to relate to today's modern spiritual beliefs. Some atheists find a home in secular humanism without giving up their preferred definition of what being religious means. I'll have more to say about this in a moment. Every week here at First Jefferson, we share the stories that live in this community, the stories of joy and the stories of concern. I'd like to share a story with you today that isn't obvious to those of you viewing at home. Our singer, Reneel Baker, and our pianist, Misha Beresnev, are not with us as we record this service. Misha has a concert in Dallas, and he's at the rehearsal. Reneel is at his job. They took the time, along with our crew of technicians, to pre-record the music for this service last week. I think that's a wonderful way of giving to this community, and I wanted to thank them and wish them well on their endeavors today. Let us take a moment to consider this community, this diaspora of Unitarian Universalists who are unable to come together in this building, but who still live in community, connected to one another by faith and telephone and the internet, and thinking of one another. Let us share a silence for a few moments, and then we'll have some music to meditate by. My personal response to the third question, is there a place in Unitarian Universalism for religious humanism, is unequivocally yes. Just as I believe that there is a place for Christianity and Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and all the world religions, because they give us insight into our own history and the history of human thought and nature. They are a part of our principles and sources, a library of thought and action, things that have worked and things that haven't. Like Carl, who felt broken by his sadness, we all learn how to be better human beings from the things that brought us grief or a temporary sense of failure. I'm a believer that if we discard or disregard everything in our lives that didn't turn out well, or don't live up to today's expectations, we are in great danger of repeating our mistakes or being brought down by grief and failure once again. In 1997, the Unitarian Universalist Association issued a survey that was answered by nearly 10,000 Unitarian Universalists throughout the world. I wasn't able to find a more recent one, but I think you will find the responses significant. And one of the questions was about the responders' theological perspective. In this survey, 46% labeled themselves as humanists, with no distinction between religious or secular humanism. The next largest group was a mere 19%, those who followed an earth and nature-centered spiritualism. In decreasing order, we are composed of theists, 13%, Christians, 9.5%, mystics, 6.2%, Buddhists, 3.6%, Jewish, 1.3%, and Hindu, 0.4%. Now, my guess is that the ratios would be pretty much the same today, with possibly a few more humanists and Buddhists and fewer Christians and theists, but not by much. But even more important, than particular faith constructs, I think, were answers to questions like, how has your life been changed, affected, or supported by your Unitarian Universalist faith? The first was selected by almost 2% of the responders, and the rest were in decreasing percentages. No, I think that should be 20%, between 19 and 16%. Here is how being a Unitarian Universalist affects people's lives. It shapes my engagement with the world. It provides a place to recognize and develop my gifts and to address my needs. It encourages growth in tolerance for ambiguity, differences. It has transformed my way of being in the world, how I live, what I spend time and money on, and what I give away. It eases my isolation. It gives me courage to challenge society's norms and work for social change. And it provides a common faith for my partner and my family. And that's a pretty powerful claim for any religion. What I found most touching in this survey were responses to the question, what are the deepest yearnings of your heart? And here are the answers. To make a difference, help build a more just world, 34.2%. To become whole, find meaning, 26.6%. Happiness, nurturance, and love for children and family, 26%. Peace and harmony, 22%. To be known and loved, 17.1%, and to feel I am a part of a wondrous creation, 12.5%. With almost half of Unitarian Universalists describing themselves as humanists, I would say that it has had a profound effect on our members. There are 38 questions in all in the survey, and if you would like to see how diverse and similar we all are, I encourage you to look at it for yourselves. Just go to uua.org and search for the 1997 Needs and Aspirations Survey. I would be curious to learn if you see yourself in these statistics and in what I have shared with you today. What does the Unitarian Universalist faith mean to you, and why? Perhaps it's a question we should ask more often of ourselves and of one another. As a response, I couldn't say it any better than our own Theodore Parker, whom I often quote in a benediction, but also like to sing about. So please join me in our closing hymn. It's number 1058 in the Teal hymnal, and it's Theodore's words, "Be ours a religion."
Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love.
Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Our chalice has burned this morning as a beacon of hope for the future, a symbol of trust in the past. We extinguish it now because I know you take it with you in your hearts and your minds. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going with all the effort, frustration, the grief, the joy? To be caught up in this sense of wider relatedness, to sense our being connected in live ways with all the world and everyone in it, is the heart dimension of religion, whatever its name. So may it be in all our lives.